It's great to be with everyone. I am really, really excited to present with you all some of our work in home hospital or acute care at home that we've been doing. I just want to share my slides quickly to get started and look forward to a lot of your questions. Um, and so again, super excited. I know that there are a lot of people in Singapore thinking about home hospital care and how we can do it right and how we can do it wrong and how it can really transform, I think, a lot of the acute care medicine that's delivered to acutely ill adults. Just want to give up my disclosures. I have a PI-initiated study and co-development agreement with Bioformus, a PI-initiated study with IBM, and receive fees from the Metro Health System. I want to start off with actually saying that we've used in America quite a bit, and this is that America's healthcare system is unfortunately neither healthy, caring, nor a system. And I'm part of that system. I'm actually, working right now on our home hospital service today, and I really want to work to change that. And so, what I want you to think about, maybe just shout it out to yourself. I know we're a big audience today. What do you see here? And when I look at this, I see, a gentleman lying in bed, and it looks like an old hospital. And this is an old hospital. And when I think about the date, it's 1933 in the United States in this picture. And if you look over here on the right, it's actually now 1944. And maybe guess the next one. What do you think this is? How far have we come? It's now 1960, for example. And then finally, we have present day. So the reason I show you these is that a lot has not changed when it comes to how we deliver acute care. Believe it or not, there's a window in every picture, there's a water jug in every picture, a bed in every picture. And if you're lucky, a doctor rounds on you once a day, nurses see you several times a day. The medicine has changed a little, the imaging has changed a little, but the construct of how we take care of acutely ill adults has really not changed much in almost 100 years, almost around the world. And so really, I think if we're going to change this quote into America's healthcare system is a healthy caring system, or for that matter, Singapore's healthcare system, I think we need to do a few things. We need to marry digital health technology with the right people in the home. And if you can do both of those things together, you can have an outsized impact. If all you do is throw an app at something, you're not going to be successful. And if all you do is throw people at something, you're not going to be successful. But if you can throw the combination of the right people in the home with digital health technology, I think you can have a very profound and outsized impact. So briefly, I want to describe to you what this home hospital care model is, explain some of the evidence base behind it, describe kind of its current scale and adaptation, particularly in our country, in the United States, and then describe technology and trends for home hospital. So I don't need to tell a lot of the folks, I'm sure, in the audience that there are a lot of problems with hospitalization, right? So 20% of older adults will become delirious when they're hospitalized. 1 in 3 will lose functional status they never regain. And 1 in 10 of all comers to a hospital in my country, in America, will have some sort of an adverse event, a hospital-acquired condition, a fall, a medication error. 1 in 10. We would never get onto an airplane if 1 in 10 times there was an adverse event, but we go into hospitals all the time. And there's actually pretty poor inpatient access, right? In my hospital, there's over 100% capacity for medicine beds. And there's a 12-hour wait from the time you come to the emergency department to the time you get your disposition. And it is the most expensive care setting we can create. And so home hospital seeks to ameliorate each of these 3 issues. It's not going to fix them entirely, but it seeks to ameliorate them. And if you think of home hospital as, right in the sweet spot of giving care on the medical floor, if the ICU is all the way on the left, highest acuity care, and telehealth or passive things are all the way on the right, home hospital is all about getting the right care to the right patient at the right time in the right place. And that is a patient who would normally be on the general medical floor. And it's about changing this paradigm of I'm sick, I need to go to the emergency room, to I get hospitalized, to actually I get home hospitalized. And so in general, there are 3 models, right? There is transfer to the home, where the patient is already in the hospital. They need more acute care hospital time, but we can deliver them that care at home with a special home hospital team. There's substitutive with the emergency department, where the patient comes from the home, uses the emergency department for their triage and their diagnosis and their first round of treatment, and then goes back home with a special team. And then there's substitutive without the ED, where the patient just gets care immediately in their home. And the best definition we have for home hospital is home-based provision of services usually provided in the acute inpatient setting. And importantly, it is not home health, it is not home hospice, it's not home infusion, which are terms we often use in the US. So what kind of care can you get in the home hospital? Any infectious process. So things like cellulitis, complicated UTI, pneumonia, heart failure exacerbation, asthma and COPD exacerbation, and dozens of other conditions that I have listed here. There have been over 75 DRGs billed for home hospital care in the United States and growing. And what do you get when you're home hospitalized? So typically, and this varies all across my country, but 2 daily nurse or paramedic visits, 1 daily doctor visit, either remote or in the home, IV medications, advanced respiratory therapies, remote vital signs monitoring with different sensors, which we'll talk about, diagnostic testing, potentially with point of care technology, and then 24/7 phone and video as well. The team needs to be available to be able to be in a patient's home 24/7. So want to move on to a little bit about the evidence base for home hospital, right? So this is a nice idea, David, but who does it actually work, right? And so I will submit to you that I think home hospital is actually probably the most evidence-based health service delivery innovation that exists, right? I actually can't name for you a randomized controlled trial for ICU level care or step down level care. I don't know that it's ever been tested, and it may actually not work that well. There have been tons of randomized control trials for home hospital. A great meta-analysis came out from the Medical Journal of Australia showing a large reduction in mortality for patients who are home hospitalized compared to for patients who are traditionally hospitalized, and a large reduction in readmissions as well, right? So if this were a drug, everyone would buy this drug because it reduces mortality and readmissions. So I want to show you the first randomized controlled trial in the US. I was very privileged to help lead a team that did this trial. And so this is how it worked. Our patients started in the emergency department, and the decision was made to admit those patients. And if the patient met our home hospital criteria, which I'll show you in a moment, and they agreed to enroll, and only after that happened, then we would randomize them. So imagine the patient's in the emergency department and we walk into their room and we open an envelope and it says, go home with our team or stay here in the hospital just like normal. And so if you went home, again, you'd have that nurse, you'd have the doctor, you'd have physical therapy, occupational therapy, home health aides, and all the treatments that you expect to get in a hospital. So you could be included in this randomized control trial if you lived within our catchment area, had to be an adult, and you had to have one of those primary diagnoses that I showed on that slide before. Very important. We were a diagnosis-based service. Couldn't be involved in the trial if you were undomiciled, right? If you were homeless, it is home hospital. If you resided in a skilled nursing facility, or if there was things like domestic violence going on. And then we also excluded certain secondary conditions like end-stage kidney disease, as well as use some risk scores in order to prognosticate against things like the intensive care unit. Because again, we're doing medical care, general medical care, not intensive care. So I want to show you what these patients looked like. This trial actually stopped early because it was so successful. But folks were old, in their 70s to 80s on average. And actually, folks were older among the patients that went home just by chance. Also, looks like there were slightly more white folks in the home arm and Black folks in the control arm. And these were very ill people. If you look here, almost a third had been either admitted in the last 6 months or to the emergency department in the last 6 months, and a quarter lived alone. So I want to show you some of the outcomes here, just some selected outcomes. So first off, during the home hospitalization, really decreased utilization, right? So 3 versus 15 lab orders were drawn for home hospital versus traditional hospital patients. 14% versus 44% of patients got imaging during their admission, and 2% versus nearly 31% received a consultation during the admission. We didn't see any changes in hospital-acquired conditions, pain scores, high-value care, and low-value care metrics, and 0 patients were transferred back to the hospital during their home hospitalization. And then, every patient was wearing a sensor, which I'll show you in a second, and that was enabled us to get very quantified physical activity data, and it was just night and day. So 32% of the day, patients were lying down when they were at home versus 66% of the day patients were lying down in the hospital. And that probably doesn't surprise the clinicians among us, because what do people do in the hospital? They lie in their bed, unfortunately. We were also able to show a very sizable cost reduction, which I'm happy to talk about in the Q&A if it's of interest. So we were also able to show that after home hospitalization, there was a marked reduction in 30-day readmission. So 7% of patients at home versus 23% of patients in the hospital were readmitted within 30 days. And we saw a reduction in ED visits as well. So in our hospital, we started out in 2016 on this trip. We did the first pilot randomized control trial. Then in 2017 and 2018, we did a large randomized control trial, which was just published last year, which I just showed you data on. And since then, we've been doing various studies inside of home hospital, testing different aspects, all of which we're excited to publish really soon, as well as new technology and new care models. So I also just want to describe the current scale as well as adaptation during COVID-19, because I think it could serve as a roadmap for things in Singapore. So first off, there's a hospital at home users group in the United States. I was very fortunate to co-found and co-chair this group along with some great colleagues. And we essentially represent a convener of all the different home hospitals in the country. And this slide is always out of date, no matter how often I update it. We have dozens and dozens of programs in our group and hundreds of affiliate members as well. And we've developed practice standards, quality measures, a regulatory framework for this work. And we're also doing research and advocacy. And I think this is a really important part to creating and normalizing this in a country. This has been extremely important and would encourage Singapore to start one of these as well as these programs start to build. There's also a world presence for home hospital care that I think is important to call out. And it's a wonderful body. It's the World Hospital Home Congress. We have every other year annual meetings, and it's an amazing place for all sorts of practitioners to come together who do acute care at home. And so again, on the policy side, briefly, a huge explosion in home hospitals started in November of 2020 in the US. And the reason for that was because a payment mechanism was finalized. And up till November 2020, it was challenging to have payment arranged for home hospital care. You had to have some alternate payment mechanisms prior to this. But in November of 2020, our Center for Medicare and Medicaid, the federal public payer for older adults, announced that they would pay for acute care at home. This is really exciting, really exciting. And since then, we have seen now it's over 165 programs start in the span of only about 11 months, which is a pretty amazing feat given the pandemic, given how innovative and creative you have to be to do this. But we are seeing programs all over the country, as well as thousands and thousands of patients cared for in my country. And so it is a really, really interesting growth, and I think shows the power of public policy to make these kinds of programs sprout up and start to care for patients in a really high quality manner. I also want to touch on, how have these programs adapted to COVID-19? Because some people look at this and say, oh, home hospital, that's for COVID. And the answer is, oh, no, absolutely not. Home hospital's been around for decades, and it's been done well before COVID existed. It just so happens it might be very, very adaptable and very good for COVID, but it's very important to keep in mind that this is for many, many conditions, not just COVID. And so I think really interesting to look at some of those adaptations. Here's a paper in the Annals of Internal Medicine showing 184 patients who were cared for at home very safely. About 13% got escalated, meaning they had to go back to the hospital, and none died of the 184. Here's a study that my group led showing that we were able to create 419 bed days of capacity for our hospital during the first big surge that hit New England back in 2020, with just one physician, 2 nurses, and 1 mobile integrated health paramedic. We were able to show essentially only a 3% escalation rate and 0 mortality during that time. We were also able to do some really interesting research in the rural space. About 1 in 5 Americans live in rural areas, and that's about 60 million people. And there's not great access to care in those areas. And essentially, we wanted to see, can we create a platform for rural home hospital care? And so we've been actually piloting a prototype of rural home hospital care for the last 2 years, and are excited to actually to be announcing kind of the first randomized controlled trial of rural home hospital care as well. But this really combines a whole set of technology and a platform in order to establish internet connections in rural areas and to bring a physician's expertise into a patient's home. If interested, we've published 2 of our initial papers on this, and we'll be publishing kind of some future stuff as well, showing the experience of the randomized controlled trial. And so finally, just wanted to finish off my remarks. I just have a few more minutes to talk about kind of some of the technology trends for home hospital. And so I think the first big decision when launching one of these programs or thinking about how to monitor these patients is to think about the difference between active and passive human interface design. Passive being the patient just needs to be there, to sit there. They don't actually have to do anything. And active meaning they actually have to do something, they have to input something into the system. Always, and I'm sure there's engineers at this conference, always, 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 we want to design a passive system when we can. We have patients in our program with very low health literacy who really need passive designs almost all the time. Then there's some spatial decisions when it comes to some of the monitoring technology, right? Are you going to have an ambient system, a wearable system, or something that intermittently you have to use? Right now, we don't have the technology for ambient systems in many cases. Most of them start to fail after 6 feet of distance, which, I don't know about you, but I don't live in a 6-foot long house. And so right now, we don't have a lot of ambient technology, but it certainly would be great. So if the engineers around think about designing us some ambient sensors. Wearables are pretty much the next best thing we have to get really high quality medical grade data on folks. But figuring out kind of which sort of spatial sensor you're going to choose is really important. And I would actually argue that what you don't need is a control center or a mainframe or a big monitoring area. Home hospital is all about decentralizing the care that you deliver, not about centralizing it into another bricks and mortar place. And so I want to go over just a few opportunity areas that I see in terms of the tech for home hospital. And I'll break it out into diagnostics, prognostics, and therapeutics, because I think there's opportunities in all 3 areas for home hospital. The first is in diagnostics, right? So this is the Abbott iStat, excellent device, gets the job done often, a lot of drawbacks to it though. And frankly, it's 20, if not more than 20-year-old technology. We just haven't been able to find anything better. And so right now, the question is, can we create more mobile diagnostics in the home, right? Can we use microfluidics to monitor patients in a better way? Can we do mobile PCR? Can we do portable ultrasound? Can we do portable CT and MRI in the home? Right now, a lot of those things are out of reach, but I think offers a really big opportunity for diagnostics and is super pertinent to home hospital care. And then there's prognostics, right? So we use this vital patch that I talked about. It goes right here on the chest, and patients wear it throughout their admission. This gives us telemetry, heart rate, respiratory rate, and we're able to monitor continuously their vital signs through it. But again, a great piece of technology, but leaves a lot on the table that we can still think about. And so need to think about kind of contactless, passive in-home sensing opportunities that we just don't have right now. And also need to think about next generation analytics and alarms, because we are still using old static alarm systems right now, which truly do not help us understand patient physiology to the ideal level. And then finally, therapeutics. So, we use things like Acapella devices and have for decades, but there are a whole new class of therapeutics in the home for acute care that we need to be thinking about, whether it's improving balance and gait control with foot inserts, delivering IV therapy subcutaneously, using soft exoskeleton suits in order to improve the way that our patients can move and function and still be at home without needing aids, as well as using robotic companions, right? Japan is a big leader in this. And we need to be able to start to lower the staffing ratios that we need by leveraging robotics. So with that, I'll just leave you with the concept that I hope I have driven home, that reimagining the best place to care for acutely ill adults holds enormous potential. And I truly think that by combining digital health technologies with the right kind of people in the home, we are going to see an enormous agile restructuring of how we deliver acute care. And I look forward to seeing that happen in Singapore. I think it's very, very possible. So with that, I will wrap up and welcome any questions. Look forward to a dialogue. Thanks so much. Lucius, all you.
Thank you, Dr. Levine, for sharing with us on your novel approach. I see in the chat there are quite a number of questions. Maybe I'll select for a few and let Dr. Levine enlighten us on his views on that. So I'll pick one, the top votes. Based on your experience, who is more resistant of the home hospital idea? Patients or healthcare providers? And what are their key concerns and how did you address them when you launched your program?
Yeah, that's a great question, Aloysius. There's resistance in both of those groups. I would say the most resistance comes often from clinicians, but it's honestly, it's probably a tie. And the answer is it depends. There are patients who the second you mention the idea, it's the greatest thing that they've ever heard, right? They're desperate to go home. They've been in the hospital many, many times. They don't want to keep doing this. And they know that they can get better care at home when you describe the kinds of care. And so, I think where we see some resistance are among sometimes the folks who have never been to the hospital and they're scared and they don't know. And they've been told, you're really sick, you need to be in the hospital. Or we've taught them for decades that what do you do when you're sick? You go to the hospital. Well, we need to unteach that a little bit. And we need to say, actually, when you're really sick, you need to get care in your home that's very advanced. And so I think, using lots of education techniques, videos, things like that can really help the patient perspective. On the clinician perspective, it really depends. Most clinicians are extremely open to this care model. They really are, especially when you show them the evidence, or at least show them how you're monitoring their patients. I think that really helps them feel very rest assured. Some of the key things that we use with clinicians are a lot of data. We show them a lot of data, and we continue to really work with them carefully to ensure that we're delivering really good care to the patients that they normally would have cared for in the hospital.
Thank you, Dr. Levine. I'm going to pick a pair of questions from the chat, and it's going to be on resourcing. One is on manpower and one is on cost. So I'll read them out. Do home hospital services require more manpower resourcing? And are there any studies that show its cost effectiveness? Second question, what is the cost difference between home hospital and inpatient hospital care? And how is that extra cost justified?
Sure. Yeah, so the question about people power, I fear, Aloysius, my answer to many of your questions is it depends. But it depends. So it depends really on what your current staffing ratios are, right? Hospitals are all about ratios, right? So how many patients to how many nurses and how many patients to how many doctors. And I can tell you that in my country, it is extremely, extremely variable. Right. So in some parts of the country, one nurse cares for 10 patients in a hospital. In other parts of the country, one nurse cares for 3 patients in a hospital. I don't know what it is in Singapore, I'll be honest, but it's very variable in my country. And so what I will say is that if you are at a kind of a hospital where it's a 1-to-3 ratio, home hospital is going to be a very, very nice reduction in the amount of staff that you need to take care of patients. But if you're in a hospital where it's 1-to-10, home hospital may be less efficient from a people power perspective. And so really depends on the geography that you allow your home hospital to operate in, also affects the efficiency of your team. And so there's a ton of different variables that go into that. And so really I have seen both ways where sometimes it's more efficient, sometimes it's less efficient, but it really depends on kind of your home situation. And that then clearly drives cost effectiveness. And so there have been several studies showing that home hospital costs less. It's been done in Australia, it's been done in Italy, it's been done in France, it's been done in the UK. And then our study that I presented to you also showed a cost reduction. And so while some of those are not traditional cost effectiveness studies, that term has a very specific connotation, there are several studies showing a reduction in cost.
Thank you so much, Dr. Levine. I'm afraid we've run out of time for this session. Thank you for your keen insights into this to your home hospital concept. Thank you everyone as well for participating in this segment.